CBS Young and the Restless spoilers shock. Jack Abbott's questions about Allie Nguyen had begun as quiet concern and slowly hardened into something far more unsettling. At first, he asked out of habit, the way a grandfather checks in on a grandchild whose absence feels temporary, almost logistical. Where was Allie now? He would ask Noah Newman casually, as if expecting an ordinary answer about travel, work, or the kind of distance young people sometimes need to grow. But the longer the questions went unanswered, the heavier they became. Why hadn't Allie come back to Genoa City? Why did every mention of her name cause Noah to tense, to deflect, to retreat? Why did Noah suddenly avoid Jack altogether, declining invitations, dodging encounters, treating concern as intrusion? Jack sensed immediately that this was not about privacy, but about avoidance, and avoidance, in his experience, was never benign. Jack reminded himself repeatedly that he was not overstepping. He was Allie's grandfather, bound not only by blood, but by responsibility. He had welcomed her into the Abbott family with pride, watched her build a fragile sense of belonging after years of displacement, and trusted Noah when he promised to give her a life rooted in happiness and stability. Jack had believed him because he wanted to. Noah's assurances had once sounded sincere, grounded in love rather than convenience. But time had stripped those assurances of credibility, leaving behind a hollow space where truth should have been. Jack could feel it now, the way one feels a structural weakness long before collapse, and it terrified him. What Jack did not yet know was that Noah's silence was not an act of protection, but of erasure. The love Noah once claimed to feel for Allie had curdled into something unrecognizable, something brittle and self-serving. They had not simply drifted apart. They had betrayed each other in ways that could not be repaired by distance or time. Whatever tenderness once existed between them had been consumed by deception, and Noah, unable to face what he had done, chose denial as his refuge. In avoiding Jack, he was not shielding Allie's privacy. He was shielding himself from accountability. The truth, when it finally surfaced, did so with devastating force. Jack and Kyle Abbott, driven by instinct and a growing sense of dread, began piecing together fragments Noah had tried to scatter. Inconsistencies in timelines, unexplained absences, whispers that refused to stay buried. All of it converged toward a conclusion so horrific Jack's mind resisted it at first. Allie had not chosen to stay away. She had not built a new life elsewhere. She had been taken from it. Allie was dead. The revelation shattered Jack's composure in a way few things ever had. Grief did not arrive gently. It detonated, collapsing years of restraint and replacing them with raw, uncontrollable rage. The name attached to the truth made it even worse. Sienna was responsible. Sienna, whose presence had always felt wrong, whose charm masked something predatory, had not merely destroyed Allie's life, but had dismantled the Abbott family's sense of safety. And Noah, the man Jack had trusted to protect his granddaughter, had been ensnared by her. Noah had not just failed Allie, he had betrayed her, seduced by obsession and weakness, allowing Sienna to replace love with manipulation until loyalty meant nothing at all. When Jack confronted Noah, there was no room left for civility. Years of patriarchal restraint gave way to instinct as Jack lunged forward, gripping Noah by the collar, his fists striking not out of calculation, but desperation. The question that tore from him was not about betrayal or explanation, but about location, about the one thing that still mattered. Where was Allie's grave? Where had they left her? Jack's voice broke as he demanded answers, because grief had finally eclipsed reason. A grandfather's worst nightmare had become reality, and the man standing before him was not a grieving partner, but a complicit coward who had chosen silence over truth. Kyle watched the confrontation with horror, understanding that whatever remained of their family would never be the same. The loss of Allie was not just a death, it was a fracture that exposed every weakness, every misplaced trust. Noah's collapse under Jack's fury did not bring relief, only confirmation that the truth, once unearthed, could not heal what had been destroyed. Sienna's crime had claimed more than a life. It had poisoned relationships, rewritten loyalties, and left behind a legacy of guilt that would not fade with time. In that moment, Jack was no longer a businessman, no longer Victor Newman's rival or the head of a powerful dynasty. He was simply a grandfather confronting the unthinkable, standing over the wreckage of promises broken and futures stolen. The question of where Allie rested was not just about mourning. It was about justice, about refusing to let her be erased the way Noah had tried to erase her from conversation. And as Jack's grief settled into something colder and more dangerous, one truth became inevitable. This loss would not remain private, and the consequence for Noah, for Sienna, and for anyone who had helped bury the truth were only just beginning. The aftermath of Jack's eruption left the room hollowed out, as if all the oxygen had been burned away by grief. Noah Newman crumpled under the weight of the truth he could no longer outrun, his silence finally exposed not as loyalty to the dead, but as fear of the living. Kyle Abbott moved instinctively not to defend Noah but to steady Jack, whose rage now trembled with a sorrow so profound it threatened to tear him apart from the inside. The question that had detonated everything where Allie was buried hung in the air like a verdict waiting to be read, and Noah's inability to answer it immediately was itself an answer, one that confirmed the depth of his complicity. When Noah finally spoke, his words came fractured, stripped of the justifications he had rehearsed in private. He admitted that the end of his relationship with Allie Nguyen had not been mutual, that what he had called distance was in fact displacement, engineered by Sienna with a precision that exploited every insecurity he carried. Sienna had not arrived as a threat, she had arrived as understanding, as validation, as escape. She reframed Noah's doubts as enlightenment, his guilt as weakness, and his silence as protection. In that reframing, Allie became an obstacle rather than a person, and once that transformation took root, the rest followed with terrifying ease. Noah did not confess to pulling the trigger weight of reform that Trigger took, but he confessed to looking away, to choosing the lie that preserved his comfort over the truth that might have saved Allie's life. Jack's grief curdled into something colder as Noah's confession clarified the timeline. The betrayal was not a single moment. It was a series of choices, each one easier than the last, each one narrowing the path until there was no return. Jack understood this pattern. Intimate life had seen it in boardrooms and marriages, in rivalries and alliances, but seeing it culminate in the death of his granddaughter stripped the lesson of all abstraction. This was not strategy. It was moral collapse. And the collapse had been enabled by charm, by proximity, by a woman who understood that the most effective violence is often administered by proxy. The name Sienna now carried a different gravity. She was no longer a peripheral menace, but a central axis of the catastrophe, a figure whose influence extended beyond a single relationship into the heart of the Abbott family. Kyle recognized it too, the way Sienna's shadow lengthened across everything they touched. He began retracing steps, re-examining conversations and coincidences that had once seemed harmless. Patterns emerged quickly once he allowed himself to see them. The isolations presented as opportunities, the conflicts were framed as inevitabilities. The subtle encouragements to keep secrets for now. Sienna had not merely destroyed Allie. She had engineered a vacuum in which accountability evaporated. When Jack demanded the location of the grave again, his voice no longer shook. It hardened. Noah's answer, when it came, was halting and incomplete, a place unnamed, a direction sketched rather than fixed, a truth buried under layers of cowardice and fear. It was enough, however, to set Jack in motion. Grief had given way to purpose, and purpose, once ignited, moved with frightening speed. Jack did not threaten Noah with violence again. He threatened him with exposure, with the one thing Noah had feared more than guilt. Silence would no longer protect him. Cooperation was no longer a choice. It was the only remaining mercy. Kyle stood beside Jack as they prepared to pursue the truth beyond words, understanding that the path ahead would not end with answers alone. The recovery of Allie's remains wherever they lay was only the beginning. Justice would require confrontation, not only with Sienna, but with every system and person that had allowed her to operate unchecked. Kyle felt the familiar pull of rage, but he tempered it with resolve. This was not a moment for spectacle. It was a moment for precision. Sienna thrived in chaos. To defeat her, they would need clarity. As the night deepened, the weight of Allie's absence pressed down on the house with a cruel intimacy. Jack retreated briefly, not to escape, but to steady himself, allowing the memories to come without resistance. The way Allie laughed when she felt safe. The way she leaned into belonging as if it were something she had waited a lifetime to earn. Those memories did not soften his resolve, they sharpened it. He would not allow her to be reduced to a footnote in someone else's moral failure. He would not allow her to be buried twists in the ground and again in silence. For Noah, the reckoning had only begun. The admission he had finally made did not absolve him. It stripped him of the last illusion that he was merely a bystander. He understood now that the choices he had made would follow him relentlessly, that forgiveness, if it ever came, would not arrive on his terms. The question of where Allie rested was no longer his to answer alone, and the truth he had tried to contain would expand, implicating him in ways he could no longer manage. Somewhere beyond their immediate reach, Sienna remained free, unaware or unconcerned that the story she believed she had buried was clawing its way back to the surface. The Abbott search would not be quiet, and it would not be brief. It would cut through reputations and alliances alike, because Jack understood something fundamental now. Power means nothing when it fails to protect the innocent, and restraint becomes complicity when it shelters the guilty. Allie's death had transformed grief into mandate, and as Jack and Kyle stepped forward to claim it, one certainty emerged with chilling clarity: this would not end with mourning. It would end with accountability, no matter how many lives were destabilized in the process.